Hi, I'm Alan Pearce. I'm a journalist. I'm an author of the book Coma and Near-Death Experience, the beautiful, disturbing world of the unconscious. Now, you might ask why I would want to write a book about coma, which might possibly be the most boring subject under the sun. But it turns out it's not. Now, it started in COVID during lockdown. My wife and I were just at a loose end. We were watching far too much rolling TV news. And I just started to wonder why so many people with COVID were being placed into medically induced comas. I'm sure it was a good thing. I just wanted to know how it worked. I'm a journalist. I ask these sort of questions. So you look online, and the standard answer is that coma care has been a standard procedure for the past 50 years. It enables a deeper, more restorative form of sleep that allows the patient to benefit from the extreme rest and so on and so forth. And it's just the best thing that you can do to a patient who's critically ill. And the thing to remember, they will tell their patients, they will tell the families of their patients, because the patient's invariably unconscious, is that there's nothing to remember, that a coma will be a blank in their lives because their mind, their brain has been switched off. So that's the official explanation. Now, I'm a journalist. I don't just like to take the first answer, so I just thought I'd have another look. And I started looking for medical literature, and it turns out that there is no medical literature advocating prolonged deep sedation. Short periods, people don't seem to have a problem with that, but it's the weeks and months at a time where you're being fed medication, the same medication that incidentally they use on the operating table. If you've ever been rendered unconscious for an operation, such as, I don't know, having your appendix out or whatever, you've been rendered comatose. They're using the same drugs, more or less, depending on availability, on the operating table as they are within coma. Now, that doesn't sound very good, because they know that just short times of deep anesthesia in an operating room will cause cognitive harm. And you'll notice more and more that if you're due for an operation, they will try and talk you into having a local anesthetic. That's because they know that the meds they give you can cause cognitive harm. So, I'm starting to realise this, and it's starting to not look like the most boring subject under the sun, but I had no idea of writing a book. So I then started to find coma survivors, and I looked all over. How do you find a coma survivor? Facebook, very, very good. Reddit, very, very good. And I started, if you look on Facebook, for example, people are posting about the events that they're experiencing within coma, bearing in mind that doctors are telling you that it should be a blank in your life. There's no circadian rhythms. You don't go through REM sleep. There's no dreams. So it should be a blank. And yet people in coma are experiencing the classic near-death experience, as one possibly could imagine. They're having a nightmarish form of near-death experience, which I'm going to go into in a moment. And some people are experiencing alternate lives. Now, these are lives, it's not like a dream. These are lives rich in every detail, as real, every bit as real as the life we're having now. Lives with, like you get married, you have kids, you go on vacation, you hold down a job. That kind of life lived minute by minute. Now, one of the guys that helped us with the book was Nick MacDonald. Now, he was placed in a coma for 2 weeks because he had pneumonia. Inside his coma, he lived an entire life. He could talk about his childhood. His dad was a big-time motorcycle mechanic and taught him a thing or two. His life, Nick was like, he could turn his attention to anything. He could fix mechanics. He could do carpentry, he could do gardening, he could do all sorts. And he describes his really, really rich life. Lots of different relationships, lots of different jobs. At one point, he got called up for the US Army and did a tour of duty in Southeast Asia. And he can talk in detail about that. Now, this is within his coma, minute by minute by minute by minute. Now, when Nick came out of his coma and opened his eyes in the hospital, he's coming directly from this other life. And the raven-haired woman who's sitting beside his bed holding his hand, claiming to be his fiancée, he has absolutely no knowledge of. He doesn't know who she is at all. And Nick at this time, because he's been in a coma and they've given him a ventilator, that causes damage to vocal cords, and he's not able to speak for weeks in some cases. In his case, probably 2 weeks, I think. So he can't even talk to this young lady and say, "Who the heck are you?" And he's got this entire other life. Now, doctors will tell you that this wasn't another life that Nick lived. It was a false memory and hallucination, possibly intensive care delirium. But the medical answers actually make no sense. You can't hallucinate if you're unconscious, certainly not within a coma. A false memory? He's out for 2 weeks. Why would he have a false memory spanning his entire life, including a tour of duty, different relationships? He actually had his partner gave birth to a baby girl just before he had something that appeared to be a heart attack. But doctors dismiss this as false memory. Comas are blank. But if you were to connect Nick to an EEG brain scanner at that time, and it's extremely rare unless you've got some kind of brain injury that people connect coma patients to an EEG brain scanner, you'd see he was flatlining. Whereas in reality, Nick's mind is incredibly active. Now, doctors can't actually explain consciousness, not our everyday waking consciousness. No one can explain that to us. And they can't explain consciousness to people deep within coma, or explain events deep within coma, because they haven't got a clue. They have no starting point. So they tend to use materialistic explanations, physical things, as in you hallucinated, you had a form of mental illness, you had a false memory. And they will not go into any other realms. Certainly they won't go into any spiritual realms. So people are actually just classified as being a form of mentally ill. Mostly they're being told anything you experienced will pass. You'll just get over it. Let's face it, you've been drugged up to the eyeballs. But there's no drug or combination of drugs that will give you an alternate life spanning decades, or just 2 weeks past in this world. Because if there were, we would know about it. Now, some patients are pushed so deep within their coma, and there's no way of knowing just how deep you're sending somebody, because let's say a little old lady with dementia would take very, very, very little medication to send down. I don't know, an recreational drug user who was overweight would take an awful lot more medication to put him or her into that same position. So it's really hit and miss. So people go to all sorts of realities. Now, some are exceptionally beautiful. I mean, defying all imagination in their beauty. And some are just so ghastly, so be off the register in terms of horror, that you struggle to imagine that the human mind can make these things up. I mean, in terms of beauty, one of the guys helping us with the book, he's a hospital chaplain, a Christian hospital chaplain in Birmingham, Alabama. His name is Corey Agricola. Now, he had a mystery virus, no one knows what it was, and they kept pumping him full of antibiotics, and they told his fiancée that his last chance was we put him in a coma, so they put him in a coma. When he starts in his coma, he's aware of absolutely everything around him. He's like in a locked-in syndrome. He's just paralyzed, but he can hear everyone talking about him. And he wants to give answers, and he wants to say things. And then his reality changed, and he's still in a hospital bed, but he's in another hospital bed in another time and a place. He's in Texas, and where he used to minister to a church out there. And then the next thing you know, he's driving around in his Jeep, and he's drinking Coca-Cola, and he's visiting all sorts of places. And then he's going back in time. He's with his parents, and they're having Sunday dinner, and he's there in that moment 100%. In time, he feels himself moving forward, and he finds himself in what he would describe, I guess, as heaven, but not a Christian heaven. He looked, and there was no Christ, there was no God. There was only a mountain of light, a magnificent, beautiful mountain of light. And being a Christian, perhaps, I don't know, to ease the mind for the past and you give them something familiar, he saw scripture verses coming across his mind. Some he knew, but there are others he didn't know. Scripture verses he didn't know. And eventually, when he came out of his coma, he was able to look these up, and there they were, word for word, and yet he'd never studied them before. So that's one version, and he came out of that extremely well. One of the few people I spoke to who had a really good coma event. Corey works at this hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, and he's ministered to thousands of patients, and he was burning out. He was really getting to the end of his tether. His coma experience has just given him new impetus. So when he sits now beside the bed of a patient who's terminally ill, he can talk of the afterlife. When he talks to the family of people who are inside, a patient who's inside coma, he can tell them what he saw. He can give them a first-hand account. And he feels totally invigorated. Well, that's a good one. Most of the people I spoke to who come out of their comas are damaged psychologically, physically, mentally, damaged in all sorts of terrible ways. And sometimes it happens to medical professionals that they're placed into a coma. But the thing is, does anybody listen to what they experience? Isabelle, who helped us with the book, she works in Cape Town, South Africa, in one of the best hospitals. And her job, in fact, is to book the anaesthetists and the doctors and arrange things like prolonged deep sedation. She got COVID, turned to sepsis. They didn't think she was going to survive. They reluctantly put her into a coma, but she said, yeah, I want to go. I don't want to experience life in intensive care. I know what it's like. Just knock me out, send me there. So they sent her into a coma. Isabelle woke up, and this is the odd thing that people will often say. They woke up within their coma and found themselves in an environment. Isabelle woke up and found herself in an organ harvesting facility. She said she spent 4 years there and she lived in a coffin, and they could regrow her organs over and over again, and they could harvest them over and over again. In this time, she said she had countless lives, and she lived and died, and she just rattled off one death after another. She's in South Africa. She was at a riot somewhere, and she was killed on railway tracks during the apartheid era. She was kidnapped, and she was held for ages by somebody who tortured her. And it got to the point where she actually couldn't take it anymore, and she just didn't want to live. She was desperate to die. And she found herself in the most exquisite landscape imaginable. Green pasture, beautiful warm, flowers, smells, the sound of a horse neighing in the distance. And she walks on, and she finds herself at some stairs climbing into the heavens, old gnarled wooden steps. And she climbs up these steps, and she makes her way to heaven. And when she gets there, she meets her relatives, her dead relatives. And they say, no, it's not your time, Isabelle. You have to go back. You've got to go home. So she does. And she says it took her ages to get back. Eventually, when she comes out of her coma, and she spends a lot of time recuperating, as they invariably do, she was able, as soon as she could, to go back to an intensive care unit to see her colleagues. And she wanted them to know what she experienced. And they were just like, what? Yeah, really? Oh, yeah? Oh, that's interesting. and no one would take her seriously. And she was just horrified by this. And eventually she got passed down the line, and she goes into some kind of therapy, some kind of aftercare thing. And she starts talking to the counsellor. And she starts telling the events that she had within her coma. And this woman doesn't appear shocked at all. She says, hold on a second. I work with some of the best doctors in the country. We've been knocking people out for decades now. And nobody in my ICU knows about this. And you're telling me this is commonplace. She says, yeah, I thought everyone knew about this. But they don't. There is no support for people post-coma. At best, they are told they had a false memory or they hallucinated, and they're given some kind of medication to try and get over it. The lucky ones find other coma survivors and with whom to talk. One of the aims of this book, our book, Coma and Near-Death Experience, is to show coma survivors, and there are millions of them, that they did not suffer alone, that they did not go mad. This book had a profound effect on me. Halfway through writing this book, my daughter, Rebecca, she died completely unexpectedly. And like any parent, I had those feelings. But simultaneously, I knew she wasn't dead. And I knew she wasn't dead because I'd spoken to so many people who died in the clinical sense and came back and could tell me things that they had experienced on the other side, that I now took it for granted that you don't die. Now, this hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd gone from believing dead meant dead. I'm a journalist. I covered wars and disasters and all sorts of stuff like that. I've seen a lot of dead people. And I just thought dead meant dead. My daughter dies, and I realise at that point that my entire outlook had changed. Now, that's not why I wrote the book, to prove these things. It's like a curious byproduct of this book. Now, I'll guarantee you this. Now, we've all heard NDE experiences, and frankly, they're new to me, but I've now heard many, many, many. There is nothing like the ones in this book. No one has fully researched until now events within coma. If you know anyone that's been in a coma, please ask them to read this book. If you have any interest in where we go, this book will show you where. I'd like to say that's it. There's plenty more to say, but please look into the book. Thank you.